Welcome back to Movie Recaps. Today I will show you a sci-fi, romance, drama film from 2016 titled Passengers. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The interstellar spaceship Avalon can be seen traveling through space, headed to a colonized world called Homestead 2. All of its quarters are empty. The vessel is on autopilot. The 258 crew members as well as the 5,000 passengers are in hibernation. Suddenly, the ship passes through an asteroid belt that's weakening its shields. Power is diverted to the main shield, but the ship is on a collision course with a giant asteroid. Suddenly, the asteroid collides with the ship, causing various malfunctions. The ship begins self-reparations, but one of the hibernation pods activates. The passenger awakened is Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer. His pod opens and an automated system helps with his awakening, telling him that he spent 120 years in suspended animation and that the ship is only 4 months away from Homestead 2. He's told that he will be able to spend that time enjoying the luxurious aspects of the ship. Jim receives instructions about his ID band, his cabin and the primary activities he's to take part of prior to the arrival on the planet. Excited and nervous to meet the people on the ship, he gets ready, leaves his cabin and walks into an automated class meant for an entire learning group. Jim looks a little anxious as the hologram explains the situation on Earth, calling it overpopulated, overpriced and overrated. It tells him to hold his questions to the end of a lesson, but Jim keeps asking why he's the only one there. He realizes that the hologram can't answer him and goes to search for other people. He gets to the main concourse of the ship. No one is there either, but an automated informational desk offers to help. Jim asks to talk to a real person and it sends him off to talk to a steward, but when he finds that no one is there too, he asks to speak to the captain. When he gets to the bridge, even though he doesn't have access to go inside, he can see that none of the main crew is awake either. Jim eventually goes to the observatory, where he finds out that the ship is actually 90 years away from Homestead 2. He realizes that he woke up too soon, so he rushes back to the concourse and sends a message back to Earth asking what he should do, because he doesn't know how to get back into hibernation. The communication system informs him that the overpriced call to Earth would take approximately 55 years to get an answer back. Jim is devastated. He walks around and finds the ship's bar, where he sees another person. As he's talking to the bartender, something seems strange about him. When he goes to get him a drink, Jim realizes that he's an android. It's called Arthur. Jim wants to find out more information from him, but he can't even explain to the android how it's possible for him to be there ahead of time. Jim wakes up in his cabin the next day and goes to the cantina, where he quickly realizes that most of the things on the menu are reserved for gold-class passengers only. He gets his plain coffee and tries to figure out how to fix his hibernation chamber. After he gets all the tools, he manages to get it operating and lies down inside of the pod. But nothing happens. Next, he decides to use the tools he found to get into the crew's hibernation chambers. That doesn't work either. Small malfunctions happen around the ship. Jim keeps returning to the bar to drink, but mostly to talk to Arthur. The android gives him some advice that convinces him to break into one of the gold-class rooms and try to have some fun on the ship. Jim tries all the restaurants, the games, the entertainment system. But as time passes, he becomes even more miserable to be there alone. One day, he gets drunk and wanders around the hibernation pods when he stumbles into an airlock with spacesuits designed for spacewalks. Jim gets into a suit and goes to the airlock, pushes a lever and then the button to release the airlock door. Once outside the ship, he's mesmerized by the view. He's the only conscious human being experiencing that moment in time. Jim releases the magnets on his boots and floats in space, feeling devastated. He comes back inside, takes off the suit, but goes back to the airlock without it on. He pulls the lever, ready to end it all, but changes his mind in the last moment, runs back inside and slips on a bottle. Jim stands up and is instantly drawn to a woman in one of the pods, named Aurora. He searches for her files in the directory and listens to her passenger interview, becoming enamored with her. Later he's seen sitting next to her pod, still listening to her interviews. Back in the bar, he's reading some of her work and is talking to Arthur about her writing. He becomes obsessed with the irony of his situation, going to another planet for a better life, waking up early and not getting there, and finding his perfect woman, only for her to be out of reach. Jim keeps thinking about her and starts getting the idea to wake her up too. He talks it over with the android, but he doesn't understand the conundrum. If he wakes her up for his own benefit, he'd be stranding her there with him, to die on the ship. Jim decides against it first, but as time goes by he can't let it go, until one day, he changes his mind. He goes to her pod and manages to activate it. As she's waking up, he can't let it go, until one day, he changes his mind. He goes to her pod and manages to activate it. As she's waking up and going through the same process as he did, he hides and goes back to his room. A little bit later, he goes to the main concourse, hoping to find her. And there she is, just as confused as he was a year ago. Jim tells her they're the only ones awake and takes her to the observatory. Then he tells her that he can't get to neither the crew nor the main commands of the ship. Aurora freaks out and wants to get back into her pod. When they get to it, Jim explains that there is no special equipment on the ship that can help them get back into hibernation, effectively telling her that they're stranded. They go back at the concourse and he tells her that she should rest, since she just came out of hibernation. She feels sorry for him, having to spend more than a year alone on the ship. Jim goes back to the bar, feeling regretful about what he did. He asks Arthur not to tell Aurora that he was the one that woke her up. The next day, Aurora wakes up. She goes back to the concourse and asks the automated info desk about the hibernation pods. Jim joins her there and they go to get breakfast. As they leave, the info desk has some sort of malfunction. In the cantina, Aurora realizes that Jim has been eating the same breakfast for more than a year and gets him one of the gold class menus. They talk about the possibility to fix the pods, but, unlike Jim, Aurora isn't ready to give up. She searches through the infirmary, then goes through research documents, eventually ending up at the crew's hibernation quarters trying to break the doors open. Jim notices more malfunctions throughout the ship. Sometime later, Aurora laments about her life on the Avalon. She writes, jogs around the ship and swims in the pool, becoming more and more aware of her situation. She goes to the cantina to interview Jim, thinking that his story might be interesting. She asks why he immigrated to the colony. Jim answers with slogans from the company first, but then further explains that he hopes that on the new world he could be somebody, he could build a life. Later, they end up in the observatory and Aurora finally shares her reason to be there. Unlike the other passengers on the ship, she has a round-trip ticket. Her idea was to go to Homestead to live there for a year and come back to Earth, to become the first journalist that has ever done that, writing the greatest story that ever was. Aurora slowly gives up on finding a way to fix their current predicament and Jim figures out a way to cheer her up. He takes her dancing, to the cinema, and to the basketball court. Lastly, he takes her to the bar to meet Arthur. She relaxes for a bit until she remembers their situation. Jim is left alone with the android, feeling awful about what he's done to her. The next moment he's seen tinkering with something and the other Aurora walks into the observatory to find a miniature of the Chrysler building he made for her. Sometime later, they go on a date at the bar. They have dinner and share stories about their lives. She tells him that her father died when she was a teenager. After the dinner, Jim takes Aurora to the airlock and they get into the spacesuits. They go out for a spacewalk together. Jim finally has someone to share that magnificent experience with. Jim switches off the magnets on their boots and they float together in space. They come back inside and immediately kiss, retreat to his cabin and sleep together. Soon after, they start living like a couple. Aurora moves into his cabin and writes about her life on the ship. They jog together, eat together, sleep together. Jim explores the ship further and finds the hydroponics bay. He brings Aurora flowers. One day the ship passes by a red giant and they go to the observatory to see it. It's Aurora's birthday, so later that night they celebrated in one of the many restaurants on the ship and then the bar. Jim goes to the washroom and prepares the ring he made for Aurora, while she stays in the bar chatting with Arthur. The android tells Aurora that Jim woke her up intentionally, unaware that he was still to keep that a secret. Suddenly, Jim comes back and she confronts him in absolute disbelief. She runs away furious and panicked. Jim comes back to his cabin to find all her things gone. He runs into her in the cantina the next day, but the moment he speaks, she runs away. Aurora is desperate. Jim's cabin, punching and kicking him, wanting to kill him. Talking to her over the comm because she keeps avoiding him, Jim tries to apologize and explain his actions to her. He tells her he fell in love with her, but Aurora doesn't care. She can't forgive him for taking her life. One night, as Jim is in his cabin, another malfunction happens. The ship faces a critical error and the main command shuts down. Later, he walks into the elevator and it malfunctions. Aurora walks into the main concourse and sees that Jim has planted a tree there. Then, she goes to the cantina, where the food dispensary is also malfunctioning. Suddenly, both of them hear the voice of the deck chief over the comms, asking who planted the tree. They both run into the concourse and see Gus Mancuso standing in front of Jim's tree. They introduce themselves and tell the chief about the situation. He doesn't understand how 3 pods could fail. Mancuso takes them to the bridge and he discovers that there is something wrong with the ship, but the information on the systems has to be checked manually. When they leave the bridge, a robot almost falls on their heads, and the two of them tell Mancuso that malfunctions have been happening all over the ship more frequently. He says that shouldn't happen, as he shows them how to collect the data. Mancuso checks on the pods when Jim joins him there. He's figured out what happened with Aurora's pod. The deck chief finds what Jim did to be terrible. Later, he's at the bridge checking the collected data when Aurora joins him. They talk about what happened with her pod, but he tells her that he can't do anything about it. Jim walks in with the 16th broken robot. Mancuso feels the hibernation sickness, so he goes to rest, but as he walks out, he coughs out blood. That night, Aurora can't sleep, so she goes for a swim. Suddenly there is gravity loss throughout the ship, and she starts drowning as the water from the pool moves with her. The gravity drive resets and she barely makes it out alive. They both run into each other going to find Mancuso. The three of them are back at the bridge, slowly discovering what has been going on with the ship. Mancuso figures out that something happened 2 years ago, taking out a major system. They need to find and fix what has caused the failure, because the entire ship is trying to pick up the slack. If they don't fix it, the entire vessel will be stranded. They go to find the problem, but Mancuso faints, so Jim and Aurora take him to the infirmary. He's dying and there are no treatments that can stop it or prolong the time he has left. Sometime later, the three of them meet in the observatory and Mancuso gives Jim his ID bracelet, tells them to fix the ship, and immediately perishes. Suddenly, the lights change to an alarming red and the ship starts shaking. Jim tells Aurora that he needs her help and they run toward engineering, but another one that afflicts Arthur as well. Jim deactivates him. They finally arrive in engineering and start looking for the problem. They find it in the power plant, and as they open the hatch, Aurora gets sucked in. The asteroid has caused a breach in the hull in that area. Jim gets sucked in too, but he holds on to the hatch as it keeps closing on it. Eventually he gets sucked in too, but they quickly manage to seal the breach. Instantly after fixing that problem, Jim realizes that there is more than one breach in the hull. The two of them follow the trajectory of the meteor and find that it has hit the reactor control computer. Jim thinks he can find replacement parts for it. They find the part and change it, but the process of venting the reactor still fails. They do it manually, but it fails again. Jim figures out that he needs to open the vent door from outside of the ship so they can cool the reactor down. Both of them go to the airlock, and as he's getting ready to go out, he gives Aurora Mancuso's bracelet because he might not come back. She helps him with the suit, and as he walks into the airlock she tells him to come back because she can't live on the ship without him. Aurora goes back to the reactor, where the temperature has hit critical heights. A bolt from the reactor propels into her arm, as Jin is getting closer to the vent from the outside and sees the door. The temperature rises in the reactor room, while he is trying to bypass the vent door to open it. He soon realizes that he'll have to manually hold the door open so the reactor can vent, and he tells Aurora. She doesn't like the plan, but he goes ahead with it and tells her to vent the reactor. She doesn't want him to die and they argue, but he tells her that they have to save the other people and she vents the reactor. The process is successful, but the fumes from the reactor push Jim away and break his tether. The pressure in his suit is dropping too. He tells Aurora what happened and she moves as fast as she can to get to another suit and bring him in. He apologizes to her again. She puts on a suit and flies out to get him, but her tether is too short. She's pulled back, but suddenly grabs onto his tether and manages to pull him in. Aurora drags Jim into the infirmary, only to find out that he's already dead. She uses Mancuso's bracelet to override the medical protocols and to resuscitate him. The medical pod does the work automatically and revives Jin. Aurora forgives him. Later, Aurora fixes Arthur and they give Mancuso a proper space burial. Jim takes her to the infirmary and tells her that he's found a way to use the medical pod as a hibernation one. He tells her to get inside the pod and ride out the rest of the journey in there. But, as is later revealed, she declines and decides to stay with him, awake on the ship. Jim finally proposes to her and they live out their lives on the ship. 88 years later, the Avalon arrives on Homestead 2. The crew wakes up and finds the ship in a very unexpected state. Aurora leaves them a message, retelling the story of the life her and Jam had on the ship while the rest were sleeping. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching. Hi. Today I'm going to explain a mystery thriller movie called The Invisible. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie revolves around Nick Powell, a high school senior who is seen to graduate with flying colors. His father passed away abruptly a few years ago, after which his mother Diane took charge of pretty much everything. She collected herself together, steadied the finances, and started micromanaging the life of her son. Diane wants her son to have a safe, traditional career, but Nick, who excels in studies, is passionate about writing and literature. In fact, he wants to skip his graduation ceremony and go to London for a writer's workshop program. In other words, Nick lives on the goddamn edge. The scene then cuts to the Powell household, where a huge celebration is underway. The matriarch of the family, Diane Powell, gets up and gives a speech recognizing her son's academic achievements. She then raises a toast in Nick's name and offers him a present with his name engraved on it. However, Nick doesn't look too chuffed up about this whole party arranged just to celebrate him. He walks away from the guests, grabs a slice of cake, and enters the garage. He sits next to a workbench and suddenly pulls a shotgun to his face. But all of these events turn out to be just a dream, as Nick soon wakes up, startled, in the morning. Shortly afterwards, he heads downstairs to the kitchen where his mother is sitting by the dining table. She has prepared 2 eggs and bacon in the shape of a smiley face for breakfast. Yep, Diane is busy reading the newspaper when Nick interrupts her. He asks whether she has thought about the writer's workshop in London. Rather dismissively, Diane replies that she doesn't need to think about it, as Nick already knows how she feels about the workshop. It is obvious that she wants her son to stay in America and focus on his career. After this bleak start to the day, Nick grabs his cycle and heads to school. It is revealed that he does homework for his fellow students in exchange for money. He hands one of his friends an assignment and makes himself a quick buck in the school's corridor. At the same time, Nick's best friend Peter Egan is being bullied by a gang of students in the boys' bathroom. The gang's leader is a ferocious girl named Annie Newton, who frequently involves herself in all manners of petty crime. She has sold a stolen phone to Peter a few days ago, and he had given half of the money at the time. Now she wants the rest of the cash, but Peter doesn't have a penny on him, and he threatens to cut off his his finger if he doesn't give the money soon. She then leaves the bathroom, and her minions follow her. "Good morning, Annie, you ran it!" During lunchtime, Nick approaches her group and offers to pay for the phone that his best friend bought from her. He puts a wad of cash on the table and asks Annie if that is enough. However, she doesn't respond kindly and tells him to mind his own business. Nick then bends down and tells Annie that she is an emotionally broken person. This expectedly offends the bully, and she tries to launch an attack on him. Moments later, both of them are reprimanded and taken to the principal's office. The headmaster inquires about the incidents, and Nick jokingly responds that Annie finds him attractive, but the principal is in no mood for silliness and promptly tells Annie to go home. He then warns Nick not to waste time on people who have no future in front of them. Elsewhere, Annie returns to her flat, a messy, broken home where she lives with her stepmom, father, and a younger brother, Victor. Her stepmom is busy smoking and watching TV, ignoring all of her responsibilities. This enrages Annie, who berates her for not feeding Victor. She threatens her to get up from the couch and not spend the whole day blowing cigarettes. Stepmom complains to her husband, asking him to say something, but he agrees with Annie. Soon the couple starts arguing, and loud profanities can be heard throughout the house. "Stop blowing cigarettes. Stop blowing other dudes. There's no pleasing you." But Annie seems to be used to it, so she simply feeds Victor and goes to her room. Later that night, Peter comes to Nick's house and the two friends have a conversation. Peter asks if Nick is going to the party that's being hosted by one of their classmates. The latter responds that he won't, as he has somewhere else to go. Nick then hands him a book in which he has hidden a plane ticket to London. This finally makes Peter understand that his best friend is flying away to participate in the writer's workshop program. He asks if Mrs. Powell knows about this, and Nick replies that she doesn't. He claims that after his father passed away, his mother has suffocated him by planning his entire life in great detail. In the meantime, Annie goes out with her delinquent boyfriend, Marcus Bohem. They head downtown, where Marcus breaks into an expensive-looking car. Annie ups the ante by shattering the window of a jewelry shop and stealing a lovely necklace from it. The duo then flees in the stolen car, likely to commit hit and runs for funsies, just as the cops arrive at the spot. The next morning, Annie prepares to head to school after spending the night with her criminal boyfriend. Marcus asks her to leave the bag with the stolen jewelry, but it seems that she doesn't trust him all that much. This enrages Marcus so much that after she leaves, he informs the authorities about about her crime. Sometime later, Annie reaches school and stores the stolen necklace in her locker. Peter, who is standing nearby, accidentally notices her doing so. He is about to get out of the way when Annie sees him staring towards her direction. Things begin to go bad when shortly afterwards the cops arrive at the school and arrest Annie for theft. They also break into her locker and discover the stolen jewelry. Annie later phones her lover and informs him that she has been arrested. He pretends to be innocent while she claims to know who snitched on her. Later, when Nick gets home, his mother informs him that the airline had called in. She reveals that his flight has been rescheduled, which makes it obvious that she now knows about his London trip. Panicked, Nick says that he can explain, but his mother seems disappointed by his actions. Later that night, Peter is headed to a house party when he is suddenly attacked by Annie and her group. She thinks that Peter was the one who snitched on her and wants to take revenge for it. Poor Peter is so nervous that he makes up a false story on the spot, thinking that Nick is already on his flight to London. He lies that it was Nick who had informed the police about the whole thing. The scene then shifts to the house party, where we see that Nick has changed his mind about going to London. In fact, he hands his ticket and hotel booking documents to a random girl at the party. He then leaves the house and goes for a walk, only to be followed by an old, beat-up car. It turns out that Annie and her goons are tailing him. As soon as he reaches a rather quiet stretch of road, they disembark from the vehicle and start beating him up. Pete is forced to watch on from inside the car as his best friend gets mercilessly kicked to the floor. Seconds later, Annie goes up to Nick and sarcastically asks him who is the broken one now. Nick snaps back and responds that she is still the emotionally broken one. This makes Annie incensed, and in a moment of madness, she kicks Nick with all her might. The poor guy then rolls down from the street and hits his head on a rock. The end. For Nick. Now panicking at their actions, one of the gang members checks on Nick, only to realize that he is barely breathing. The group is terrified that they might have just become a part of a murder. Annie suddenly comes to her senses and orders her henchmen to pick Nick up. They reluctantly do so and carry him into the woods. During this process, Nick's watch falls to the ground, but nobody notices it. The group dumps his body in a storm drain, covers it, and then walks away. Following this harrowing incident, Annie decides to head to her boyfriend's home. She soon reaches there and immediately confesses to him that she killed Nick. She begs her boyfriend to help her come up with a credible story to cover the crime, but Marcus tries to kick her out as he's scared the police will get him too. Enraged by this betrayal, Annie reminds her boyfriend that she can reveal the location of all the cars he has stolen throughout the years. She then goes to the nearby bridge and burns her clothes underneath it. Meanwhile, in a shocking twist of events, a completely healthy and unscathed Nick emerges from the bushes the very next morning. He heads to his school, as usual, and tries to talk to his classmates. However, Nick soon realizes that no one can see or hear him. He even tries to create a commotion and throws a book at the nearby shelf, but there is no response from the class. Nick then heads to the principal's office, where he hears his mother on the phone. He tries to communicate with her, but his voice doesn't seem to go through. Confused and scared, Nick tries to run back home, only to be hit by a car in the middle of the road. A huge cargo truck then runs over him, but surprisingly, he comes out of both accidents unscathed. The teenager also realizes that none of the people walking on the street noticed him getting yeeted by the car. Shortly afterwards, Nick reaches home and sees his mother talking to the local police on the phone. He tries to grab her attention, but like everyone else, she doesn't hear or see him. It turns out she has reported that her son is missing, and the authorities are looking for his whereabouts. This finally makes Nick realize that he may be dead. Sometime later, detectives Kate and Brian begin investigating Nick's sudden disappearance. They observe tire tracks a few meters inside the nearby woods and also see a broken side view mirror of a car lying on the ground. The duo also gets informed about the altercation that took place between Annie and Nick a few days earlier at school. So they head to Annie's home and find her sitting on the roof. Detective Brian, who once used to work with Annie's father, asks if she has seen Nick recently. She lies that she hasn't seen him since they argued in school. Brian knows that Annie is going through a tough time because of her father's second marriage and decides to let her off the hook. You probably killed that kid, but it's fine. I feel bad for you. He simply asks her to contact them if she finds anything suspicious before leaving her alone. In the meantime, a search party is formed to look for Nick in the woods. Where the hell is Pete in all this anyway? Elsewhere, Nick, who has accepted that he is now dead, is in his room pondering what to do. He soon notices a beautiful bird on the porch railing right outside the room. The bird seems to be gravely injured. and is about to die when a live bird suddenly appears on his shoulder. It looks exactly like the injured one, and Nick grabs it in his hand, but the live bird disappears at the same moment when the injured bird dies on the porch outside. This finally makes Nick realize what's happening. He is not dead, but is having an out-of-body experience. His spiritual form will vanish once he actually dies in the real world. Meanwhile, Detective Brian visits Marcus in his garage and inquires about the jewelry shop robbery. Marcus says he has no idea about the incident and lies that he was working here, but the detective isn't fully convinced and asks Marcus to call the police station if he meets Annie. Later that day, a nervous Marcus stops Pete on the street and informs him that he is being pursued by the cops. The duo return to the woods where Nick was last seen. They then quietly take out Nick's body from the storm drain and take it to a different location. Following this, Marcus decides to get rid of Annie once and for all, as he believes she is getting out of hand. He asks to meet her near a train station, but says that he simply wants to talk to her. Annie, in turn, calls Peter to the meeting place as well, completely unaware that he is being tailed by the police. Sometime later, all three of them arrive at the designated spot. Marcus immediately makes his intentions clear and pulls a gun on Annie. He then orders Pete to keep his mouth shut and allows him to go back home. But at this moment, several cops arrive at the location. Annie takes advantage of the distraction and snatches the gun from Marcus before running away to safety. Nick, who had arrived with the cops, yells that they will catch her, and to his utter surprise, she responds by shouting never. It is obvious that Annie can hear Nick to a certain degree, despite not being able to see him. The next day, she arrives at Nick's home. After spending the night in the school gym, she sneaks into his room and looks at his childhood photographs. Gradually, she begins to realize that Nick was not too different from her. After all, they both grew up in a broken household and faced similar problems, like emotionally distant parents. They also both knew where Nick lived, apparently. The fact that she killed him in a fit of rage begins to weigh heavily on her conscience. But before Annie can learn more, she is forced to run away when Nick's mother suddenly arrives in the room. She dashes out into the woods to the spot where she last saw Nick. To her utter horror, Annie cannot find his body under the storm drain. She does, however, discover a nicotine gum pack nearby, which makes her believe that Marcus had also come here. Soon, Annie tracks down her boyfriend and drags him to a ledge at gunpoint. Marcus eventually admits that he had moved Nick's body from its previous position. It is now lying on the foot of a nearby dam, which will open in about half an hour. Upon hearing this, Annie tries to leave, but Marcus, who is hiding a gun, shoots her in the stomach. Annie responds and shoots back, hitting him on the shoulders. She is gravely injured, but manages to call Detective Brian and tells him where Nick's body is. Soon afterwards, the police arrive at the local dam and manage to locate Nick just in time. He is immediately brought to the hospital, where he is admitted to the ICU. Nick may have been rescued from the freezing water, but his life is still hanging by a thread. He's not dead. What? On the other hand, Annie, who is bleeding profusely due to the gunshot wound, stumbles into the hospital. Her conscience is heavy, and she wants to repent for all the horrible deeds she has done. So, she walks into the ICU, where Nick is being kept, and begs him for forgiveness. Annie lies down by his side, and slowly, Nick's spirit returns to his own body. Unfortunately, by this point, Annie has lost too much blood, and she eventually succumbs to her injuries. Her final act was to save the very person whom she hated only a few days ago. The movie comes to an end as Nick visits Annie's brother Victor a few weeks later and plays with him. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching. In a small town in France, a crowd is slowly walking out of the cemetery. It turns out all these people used to be dead until now. The locals watch them in shock, not understanding what's happening. The crowd never continues to grow larger by the second, so the town council arranges a meeting to discuss the situation. The mayor reveals that dead people are coming back to life in every country, yet nobody has found an explanation for this phenomenon. It's been estimated that 70 million people have been revived around the whole world. In this little town, the resurrections lasted for a little over 2 hours, ending with almost 13,000 returned that are now wandering through the streets. By checking the cemetery register, the council learns that the revived crowd is formed by people who died in the past 10 years. There are both men and women and people of all ages, but more than 65% of them are over 60 years old. The only thing they all have in common is their health. Their bodies are in a perfect state and any pre-death sickness is gone. To keep such a huge crowd off the streets, the mayor decides to transform the local community center and the warehouses into shelters for the returned. It is important to keep them together in one place so they can identify them and send them back to their families. Since they are in perfect health, They're normal citizens again with all the corresponding rights. The council theorizes this whole process will take from 3 to 6 months to finish. The police and the army immediately begin getting the facilities ready for all the returned, who will arrange by gender and age. They must follow the UN's guidelines, which are very similar to refugee assistance. One of the revived is quickly recognized as the mayor's wife Martha. However, when someone tries taking her to the mayor, he refuses to see her and sends her home. Soldiers gather all the returned in buses to take them to the facilities. They must constantly stop them from wandering away and get them back in line. Council member Isham and his wife Veronique soon come to a shelter looking for their 6-year-old son Sylvain, who died a few years ago. They notice that the returned are being tested and interviewed, yet they don't share any kind of emotion. It seems they are always staring into the distance in silence and only speak if someone talks to them first. There's a mother who is presented with her revived baby and the shock leaves her frozen, so a nurse tells her she can take the kid home now or leave him in there until she's ready. Isham and Veronique show a picture of their son to a soldier. When he finally brings Sylvain over, the couple is shocked to see he hasn't aged a day. They're also told he can stay here until they're ready and visit him as often as they want. Later at the mayor's house, he finally reunites with his wife. Martha welcomes him home and comments on little things like him being late or looking tired. She even touches his face, acting as if she never left. Meanwhile, Rachel keeps avoiding the facilities and is creeped out by the return she sees on the streets. At home, she keeps wondering how to deal with this situation. Her husband Mathieu died in a car crash 2 years ago, however she's already grieved him and moved on. Bringing him into her life again could possibly feel like she was regressing. At the shelter dorms, Mathieu won't go to sleep and the nurses have to remind him to do so. Sometime later at work, Isham points out Rachel has been avoiding him, but she just makes up a bunch of excuses while feeling uncomfortable by a returned working at the cafeteria. Isham shares details about his time visiting Sylvain and how happy he is to see him play again as if he was never dead. He also asks Rachel about her husband, but she quickly changes the subject. A few days later, the town council holds a new meeting to discuss the issues that are arising because of the returned. They're facing a potential housing problem, not to mention unemployment, even if they could find positions for all of them. The returned are slow and don't communicate well, so there's no guarantee they could keep the job in the first place. The way the returned function is quite peculiar since sometimes they suffer from effects similar to the symptoms of a concussion, like disorientation and sleep disturbance. However, their motor functions work just fine. All these symptoms come and go, almost as if they were in a latent period. The doctors have also noticed that getting a job allows the state of the returned to progress and get healthier, so even if the reintegration project is putting a toll on the council's budget, canceling it would bring worse consequences. In the meantime, Mathieu is working as an architect again, but the issues soon appear as the council predicted. He is very slow, lethargic, and only speaks when someone else talks to him first. During meetings, his slow speech makes it hard for the others to know when he's done talking. Although Mathieu is already part of the town life, thanks to his job, Rachel hasn't tried to contact him yet and he sometimes watches her through the window. One afternoon, Rachel sees Sylvain standing in a bush while staring at nothing, which creeps her out. Veronique quickly arrives to retrieve her son and sends him back to playing with other kids in the park. While Veronique watches him, Isham arrives and mentions they should bring Sylvain to live with him already. However, Veronique feels uncomfortable and announces she's going home, saying she's tired as an excuse. Isham brings their dog to play with Sylvain and notices how the animal would bark at the elderly returned. Sometime later, the council discusses a new issue. The elderly returned wander off a lot and it's hard to keep them in the facilities or in their homes, no matter if it's night or day. They're not very aware of their surroundings, so a simple walk is dangerous for them. Since they are retired, they don't work either. Experts theorize they may be looking for a familiar place, or it could just be a response caused by the trauma of dying. Studies show that these particular returned are full of energy and are very resistant to infection, probably because their body temperature is lower than a regular human's. To deal with this, Dr. Gardet develops a medicine that helps them sleep better at night and move less during the day. This product is quickly licensed and marketed so every family can access it. Gardet also makes tranquilizer darts with this medicine for the soldiers, explaining it works as mid-sedative only on the returned. A normal human would sleep for 2 days and wake up sick, taking days to recover, so they need to be careful about who they shoot. One night while watching the returned, the soldier tells Gardet that some of them are only pretending to sleep. Suddenly, Gardet notices Mathieu dressing up and leaving the facility. The soldier explains that Mathieu does that every night and that he's just going to work. Finding this strange, Gardet decides to follow Mathieu. At the office, Gardet is surprised to find a group of returned having a meeting and chatting normally. The security guard tells him they do this every night. Sometime later, Rachel is going home after work and notices Mathieu following her. She doesn't dare to say anything and neither does Mathieu, so they start heading home together in silence. Gardet follows them in secret because he's been studying Mathieu's behavior. At home, Rachel still feels uncomfortable by her husband's presence, so she immediately hides in her room. Meanwhile, the mayor throws a party to reintroduce Martha to the rest of the family. She's happy to see everyone but doesn't eat, claiming she's never hungry in the evenings. Suddenly she turns around as if she heard something and leaves to walk into the garden. Her caretaker reveals she spends her entire days walking around the yard with no purpose. The mayor follows Martha and tries to bring her back. However, she ignores him and just keeps going, only stopping to say hi to her granddaughter. That night, Rachel finally approaches Mathieu and they manage to have a conversation. Eventually, she gathers enough bravery to kiss him and they end up getting dirty in the living room, unaware that Gardet is watching them through the window. During the next meeting, the council discusses the return's low body temperature, which is causing them to appear as creepy white figures on thermal cameras. Since they're desperate to learn more about the mysterious meetings, they decide to attach a bunch of thermal cameras to balloons to follow the return's night activity. When the first report arrives, they discover that the return cover an average of 9 miles a day regardless of age or gender. The older people are slow, but they don't stop until they're done. The cameras also confirm that night meetings are happening all over town, but it's too early to recognize any patterns. While this is being explained, the mayor notices Rachel leave the room. As days pass, the elderly return continue to wander off a lot. Rachel is feeling very comfortable with Mathieu and is even happy to have him in her life again. She thinks she should stop going to the council meetings because the way they talk about the return bothers her. Now that summer is here, Mathieu hates the heat and is always eager to go swimming. Meanwhile, Veronique is watching her son play outside, not looking happy about having the boy live with him again. Suddenly, an old returned appears and makes Sylvain's game move too fast, so Isham rushes to stop him. When he looks at his wife, she's hurrying back inside. One night, Rachel hears a noise and leaves the bed to investigate. She finds Gardet outside claiming he only wants to help her cope with the situation and that he knows how she feels. He wonders if she knows that Mathieu sneaks out every night to go to the office, but Rachel says her husband only has trouble falling asleep and he's fine. After kicking Gardet out, Rachel returns to her room and finds Mathieu awake. He asks if she was talking to someone, but she says she wasn't. Sometime later at work, Mathieu's boss notices that his report makes no sense and tries to explain what's wrong, but Mathieu doesn't understand him. This causes him to get demoted to the factory area where all the returned work. During the next council meeting, the doctors bring a big update. It turns out the returned semi-normal behavior isn't natural. They've just been imitating what normal humans do and doing things they remember from their previous life. This means they can't take on responsibilities and are only capable of learning very simple tasks if they're properly trained. They'll have to decide if the return must be taken out of society or if they can find a very specific niche for them. A few nights later, Mathieu wakes up and leaves the house without Rachel noticing. Gardet follows him and this time he gets close enough to the night meeting. The returned are all talking at the same time, discussing routes to take while pointing at maps. At the same time, Sylvain has been banging on the front door for an hour, desperate to leave the apartment. Veronique eventually drags him away and tells Isham that they should consider the government's special education program for the returned kids since she believes Sylvain scares the normal kids. However, Isham doesn't trust the council. When Veronique tries to give Sylvain another dose of the sedative, Sylvain keeps turning his head away and an angry Isham stops her. Getting upset, Veronique says their son only wants to leave them and it's as if he never really came back. Meanwhile, Martha takes a chair to the garden and tries to use it to jump over the fence, but the mayor stops her just in time. The next day, the mayor shares his situation with Rachel. He's worried that one morning he'll wake up and Martha will have disappeared. He admits he locked Martha up in the bedroom last night and that lately she scares him. Rachel refuses to talk and when the mayor asks her about Mathieu, she walks away. Meanwhile, at work, Mathieu starts having flashbacks of the day of his death, remembering he left with the car after a fight with Rachel. Eventually, Rachel goes to see Gardet, who shows her a video of Mathieu's first interview. He seemed sharper than the others and answered the questions about his past perfectly, but spontaneous speech failed him. He also didn't understand that he'd been gone for 2 years. Rachel wants to know how to help her husband. However, Gardet tells her she must come to terms with the fact Mathieu will never be normal again. Upset and frustrated, Rachel storms out. When she gets home, she discovers Mathieu is gone. At Isham's home, Sylvain looks out the window at an elderly man in the backyard. At the same time, the mayor wakes up when he hears Martha getting out of bed, but she convinces him to go back to sleep before she sneaks out of the house. Moments later, at the park, a security guard notices the returned gathering and tries to send them home, but they ignore him. Suddenly, something blows up behind the guard. Soon, explosions begin happening all over town, causing dangerous fires. Meanwhile, all the returned are leaving their homes and gathering at a tunnel. This is the plan they discussed during the meetings all along. Mathieu stares at the returned going down the tunnels and decides to go back. Soon, the mayor finally notices his wife is missing and goes out in his car to look for her. He finds her leaving with other returned and immediately drags her into the car, but the others surround the vehicle to stop them from leaving. Martha asks him if he's tired and if he wants to go with them, so she advises him to let go. In just a second, the mayor dies and becomes a return too, so the couple joins the others hiding in the tunnel. A few hours later, the news announced that the explosions didn't hurt anyone and a curfew is now in force on the whole country. Nobody knows where the returned have gone and people are told not to go looking for them. Sylvain still wants to leave and Veronique thinks they should free him, but Isham refuses. Getting desperate, Sylvan ends up jumping. Isham cries as he sees the body on the ground, thinking his son is dead again. However, Sylvan is fine and walks off to join the other returned. Determined to fight back, the military prepares grenades filled with a particular chemical that can put the returned in an irreversible coma. Soon they find a group of returned trying to reach the tunnels and start gassing them, making them fall unconscious one by one, including Sylvan. Meanwhile, Mathieu returns home and tells Rachel that the day after the fight, he left work early to talk to her and apologize. However, he didn't find her at home and went looking for her, driving so fast that he ended up in the crash that killed him. Overwhelmed with guilt, Rachel has a breakdown. The moment is interrupted by Gardet breaking into the apartment. Mathieu hears him, so the couple escapes through the window. While hearing the gas explosions in the distance, Rachel follows Mathieu into a tunnel. After wandering for a while, she cries as she kisses him goodbye. Mathieu leaves and Rachel has to go home alone. On her way back, Rachel watches the soldiers take the unconscious returned back to the cemetery. Each body is left on top of their corresponding grave and they slowly disappear. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to Movie Recaps. Today I will show you a biography, comedy, drama film from 2011 titled The Intouchable. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. One late night in Paris, Driss is driving his employer Philippe through the city. When waiting in traffic gets too boring, Driss breaks the speed limit and begins driving quite fast, dodging other cars and not caring about traffic signs. This causes the police to go after him, and Driss bets €100 that he can lose them, but after driving under a bridge, the cops catch up by ambushing them from both sides. Driss doesn't look too worried though, and this time, he bets €200 that he can get them an escort. The cops make him leave the car and he starts acting then, behaving offendedly and telling them Philippe can't move and he was taking him to the hospital. The officers find proof of this when they find the wheelchair in the truck and, when approaching Philippe, they see him convulsing, which is also an act. Seeing as it's an emergency, the cops forgive Driss for breaking the speed limit and offer themselves as escorts on his way to the hospital. To celebrate winning the bet, Driss plays September by Earth, Wind and Fire, and when they arrive at their destination, he shares a smoke with Philippe as soon as the cops are gone. Driss promises he'll handle it and drives them away just before the hospital staff could find them. This friendship began many months ago. Philippe and his assistant Magali are holding interviews to find a new caretaker for him, but it isn't going too well, because all applicants have very standard or awkward answers to their interview questions. But they're suddenly surprised when Driss storms in, ignoring the fact it isn't his turn quite yet, because he only wants some papers to be signed saying they won't hire him so he can get the unemployment benefits. He's blunt and a little rude, even hitting on Magali, but Philippe finds him amusing and asks him to come back the next day for his signed papers. Driss goes back to his home in a humble neighborhood and tries to take a bath while all his little siblings bother him, only managing to get it done in time thanks to his sister Mina, who is a bit older than the others and more responsible. While waiting for their mom to arrive, he looks through the window and notices his brother Adama getting out of a suspicious car. When the boy enters the apartment, he just says he was at school and leaves again after grabbing his bag, causing Driss to be even more sure that he's up to something. In the evening, his mom arrives, and he gives him a Fabergé egg he stole and tells her he's been away on vacation when she asks. She isn't happy to see him though, because he disappeared for 6 months and never called, and now he's shown up out of nowhere as if her home was a hotel. As she's absolutely done with all his lies and she has other children she has to take care of, she kicks him out and tells him not to come back. Driss spends the night having a smoke and some snacks with some neighborhood friends. The next day, Driss goes back to Philippe's house for his papers, and he's received by the housekeeper Yvonne, who shows him around the place and tells him about Philippe's daily routine. She also shows him the room he would get for himself with his very own bathroom. Driss can't help staring at the bathtub before he's dragged to see Philippe, who offers the signed sheet of paper but also a job opportunity. Driss accepts the 1-month trial, and Philippe tells him he bets he won't last 2 weeks. After bringing his things to his room, Driss is taught how to take care of Philippe. He must learn how to keep his legs stimulated, how to put him in the wheelchair, how to help him shower and change his clothes. Things get awkward when Driss discovers he must put on him some high stockings and even clean his butt after Philippe uses the bathroom. But no matter how much he complains and says he won't do those chores, he ends up accepting them as part of his job. Later in the evening, while he's enjoying a snack on the roof, he's interrupted by Philippe's daughter Elisa and her boyfriend Bastien, who are looking for a private place to make out, and he kicks them both out after refusing to share his beer. Driss quickly gets used to the daily routine with Philippe, even if at first he does make some mistakes he learns from, like handing the phone to Philippe instead of putting it on his ear or forgetting the baby monitor while having a bath. He also learns to organize his mail in different folders, most of the letters he opens for Philippe, but there's a series of private ones he isn't allowed to look at. When he finds a flyer promoting female escorts, he decides to start a file just for those instead of throwing them in the trash, as Philippe says. It's not all work in this new life though. Driss still makes sure to have a good time. He keeps trying to hit on Magali to no avail, and sometimes calls escorts to join him in bed. One morning, after Yvonne comes to his room to scold him for being late, she finds some dangerous weapons in his bag, but she doesn't comment on them yet. Driss' work today is to drive Philippe around, but he refuses to put him in the back of a van as if he was cargo, so instead, he takes him on one of the fancy cars that don't see much use. Philippe, who first thinks this isn't suitable and says they should be pragmatic, is soon getting excited at the idea of a faster, less boring ride, although Yvonne still disapproves. When they try to leave the building, there's a neighbor parked at their entrance, ignoring the sign on the door that says it's forbidden. Driss wastes no time and goes after the guy, grabbing him by the front of his shirt and threatening him until he moves the car. Philippe is impressed by his actions, but Yvonne, once again, disapproves. The pair goes to a museum, where Philippe is planning to buy a piece of artwork that Driss considers not worth the money because it's just a red blotch on the canvas. Afterward, Philippe meets with a relative of his, who tells him everyone is worried about Driss since he can be violent. He's also discovered he has a criminal record, but Philippe doesn't care. He appreciates Driss because he doesn't pity him and doesn't mind joking around with him. After another failed attempt at hitting on Magali, Driss has dinner with Yvonne in the kitchen while listening to Philippe dictate a letter to Magali. Claiming it's a private conversation, Yvonne turns off the baby monitor and proceeds to explain what's going on. Philippe is pen pals with a woman called Eleanor. Those are the letters he didn't let Driss open. But he's never met Eleanor in person. Their relationship is purely epistolary. Speaking of love, Driss teases Yvonne for the looks the gardener gives her all the time before going to bed. He's trying to sleep when he hears some weird sounds coming from the baby monitor. Philippe is having trouble breathing. Not being capable to ignore him even if he tries, Driss goes to his room and gently guides him through the attack with soothing words and a wet cloth to wipe his face. Philippe eventually falls asleep, only to wake up again moments later, saying he needs air. This time Driss doesn't hesitate. He puts Philippe on the wheelchair, covers him with blankets, and takes him out for a stroll by the river. This is the first time Philippe has seen Paris at night in a long time, and now he's more relaxed. He explains to Driss that the medicine can only do so much and he sometimes experiences phantom pain. When they see some girls walking by, Philippe also confesses he isn't capable of pleasuring a woman because of his situation, but he still can enjoy some satisfaction when he gets his ears massaged because they are sensitive zones. When the phantom pain threatens to appear again, Driss shares one of his joints with Philippe, who is skeptical at first but ends up loving it. Afterward, they go to a restaurant, where they joke around while sharing a meal, and Philippe decides to share more of his story. He met his wife when they were students, and shortly after they got married, she had 5 miscarriages and was diagnosed with an incurable, terminal illness. That's when they adopted Elisa. Philippe has always loved competitions, extreme sports, and speed, and a paraglider gave him that. It was during a paragliding session that bad weather caused him to crash and break his vertebrae, although he still thinks his real handicap isn't the chair but living without his wife. After joking around some more, Philippe remembers the date and realizes Driss has passed his 1-month trial, so he's now officially hired. But he needs to start by bringing back the Fabergé egg he stole because it was a gift from his wife. She would give him one every year, and he has exactly 25, matching their time together. The next day, Driss goes to talk to Mina when she's leaving school, who's a bit offended because he hasn't been answering her messages except to ask her to look for the egg. She also tells him about some cops that have been calling their home. Afterward, he visits Adama, who confesses he was found with 30 grams on him. Driss wants to take him to lunch, but Adama refuses and instead gets in the same suspicious car from before. Later on, Driss is allowed to be present while Philippe dictates his letter for Eleanor to Magali. He thinks this purple prose is very boring and that Philippe should be more direct. He's also baffled to hear that this has been going on for 6 months and they never exchanged the pictures. When he finds her phone number on one of the letters, he takes it as a sign and calls her, obliging Philippe to take the phone and finally speak to her outside the written word. Their conversation goes so well. Philippe is now on the phone with her all the time, even right before he and Driss attend the opera, during which Driss laughs and makes fun of the costumes. The next day, Driss convinces Philippe to accept to exchange pictures with Eleanor and chooses one of him in the wheelchair. Afterward, while he's painting, Elisa bursts into his room to ask him for cigarettes and makes fun of him for trying to be artistic. Getting angry, he kicks her out before going to see Philippe, who is currently asking Yvonne to change the chosen picture for one of him when he wasn't quadriplegic. She hides the picture inside the escort file right before Driss burst in, complaining about Elisa and telling Philippe he needs to discipline her, something Yvonne agrees with. Philippe agrees to talk to her, but he's mostly surprised when Driss lets it slip that he's been painting. Days continue to pass, and a friendship between Philippe and Driss continues to grow. Driss takes him to play in the snow and brings him with him when he goes out for a run. Philippe gets in his first suit and scolds his daughter while Driss listens to him through the baby monitor. When Driss finishes his first painting, he shows it to Magali, who slaps him when he tries to kiss her. Philippe, however, likes the painting and promises he'll try to sell it. The two of them have a great time with each other, enjoying things like getting a faster car, sharing joints, and even hiring escorts together. When Philippe's birthday comes, he isn't very excited about it. Every year, he pretends to be surprised that they're throwing a party and has to meet with all these relatives that only come to see him on the date to check he's still alive. Philippe says it'll all be rather boring. While he and the guests enjoy some live classical music, Driss searches for Elisa, who is crying in her room after having taken some of Yvonne's pills, which won't kill her as she expected. The reason why she's sad is that Bastien broke up with her and called her a tart, so she asks Driss to talk to the boy, which he accepts to do for a price. Meanwhile, Philippe is showing Driss painting to his relative and manages to convince him to buy it for 11,000 euros. Driss goes back to the dining room and chats with Yvonne, who tells him Magali is in a relationship with someone named Fred, but things are rather rocky at the moment, giving Driss hope. As the party begins to die down, Philippe makes Driss listen to some of the most important songs in classical music history, but he could only joke in response. After the band is done, he brings his iPod and plays Booty Wonderland by Earth, Wind and Fire before he starts dancing right in the middle of the floor. He's an incredible dancer and he even convinces the rest of the party to join him and dance with him, which Philippe enjoys watching. Later, when putting Philippe to bed, Driss opens Eleanor's latest letter to him. She sent her picture, showing she's rather pretty, and is telling him they should meet next week when she visits Paris. When the day of the date comes, Yvonne and Driss put Philippe through dozens of outfits until they find the perfect one. And since it's Yvonne the one that will take Philippe to the date, Driss uses his day off to visit Bastien and threatens him until the boy accepts to apologize to Eliza and to bring her croissants every day. He also asks him to fix his hair. Afterward, he visits his mother at work, but only to watch her from afar. At the restaurant, Yvonne and Philippe are waiting for Eleanor, who is very late. After waiting for an hour, Philippe gives up, calls Driss to ask him to take him away, and then leaves the restaurant without noticing Eleanor is arriving at the same time. That same night, Philippe takes Driss with him in his private plane and gives him the money he got for selling the picture, making him immeasurably happy. They make it to the countryside the next morning, and Philippe decides to go paragliding, dragging Driss with him as well. Driss doesn't want anything to do with it, but after initially freaking out, he ends up enjoying the experience. When they return home, Adama is there waiting for Driss and gets scolded when he sees the scars on his face. Adama will still not tell Driss what's happening in his life, so Driss makes him wait in his room while he calls Mina to tell her not to worry and goes to put Philippe to bed. Philippe, however, isn't sleepy yet. After making Driss look at a painting with him, he asks him about his family, which Driss at first doesn't want to talk about, but eventually gives it. It turns out Adama technically isn't his brother and his parents aren't actually his parents, they're his aunt and uncle. They fetched him from Senegal when he was 8 because they couldn't have kids, and his real name is Bakari Basari, but because other kids had that name, they called him Idris, and that became Driss. One day, his aunt miraculously was able to conceive, and after his uncle died, there were other men and more kids as well. In the same way Driss had talked to him about Elisa, Philippe points out that Adama needs discipline, so he fires Driss so he can be there with his family because he can't spend his whole life taking care of an old man. The next morning, after Bastien has brought his daily croissant while wearing a better hairdo, Driss packs his bags and gets ready to go. Magali comes to say her goodbyes, and when Driss tries to hit on her one last time, Magali introduces him to his significant other Fred, which is short for Frédéric. Turns out Magali isn't interested in men, and Driss gives up on the spot. On his way out of the house, he gives the baby monitor back to Yvonne and teases her for having lied to him about Magali just to mess with him. In return, she gives him the escort file he had started, and he's disappointed to find the picture he had chosen is hidden there. Driss throws away the file, but he keeps the photo for himself. Once outside, he finds a car once again blocking the entrance, so he asks him to move away even if he doesn't work there anymore. When Adana calls him out for it, Driss says it's a matter of principle. A few hours later, the two brothers go pick up their mother at the station while back at the house. Philippe is having his first dinner together with his new caretaker, who is stuffy and boring, and Philippe decides to leave him without even having a bite. Since Yvonne is out on a date with the gardener, nobody is there to scold him for it. As days pass, Driss goes back to his old life. He hangs out with his old friends again and tells the guys from the suspicious car not to bother Adama anymore. When he goes to an interview he doesn't have enough experience for, he manages to win over the employer by calling himself pragmatic and using all the art knowledge he acquired while working for Philippe. This lands him a job as a driver. Philippe continues to dislike his new caretaker and is in a constant bad mood. One night, he refuses anyone in the house to help him with his phantom pain, so Yvonne calls Driss and asks him to come over. That's how they find themselves in the situation from the beginning, with the cops chasing after them first and escorting them to the hospital later. After that little adventure, Driss drives Philippe to the coast, and the sight of the sea helps Philippe calm down. Sometime later, Driss takes care of Philippe's overgrown beard before taking him to a restaurant for lunch, but he doesn't stay because someone else will be making Philippe company today. Driss wishes him luck and finally gives him back his egg before leaving, and Philippe starts worrying about being alone until he sees who his date is, Eleanor, who is delighted to see him and doesn't mind the chair at all. The real Count Philippe Pozzo di Borgo now lives in Morocco. He has remarried and has 2 daughters. The real Driss, actually called Abdul Yasmin Selin, has his own firm and is also married with 3 children. The 2 men continue to be very close friends to this day. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching. Hi. Today, I'm going to explain a horror mystery movie called Imaginary. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens as a young woman named Jessica is caught up in one of her recurring nightmares. She is being trapped in a childhood home and being stalked by a creature posing as her father. The creature then takes the form of a hideous spider and is about to attack when suddenly Jessica wakes up in her bed. She is in her apartment, safely next to her husband, Max. Hearing his wife gasp in horror, Max quickly awakens and asks if she had yet another nightmare. Parlous, babe. It is obvious that Jessica has been suffering from erratic sleep for quite a long time now. We also get to know that their family is seen moving to a new home. Max concludes that these nightmares are a result of a variety of problems, like shifting to a new place and dealing with his ex-wife. Furthermore, he suggests that they should immediately move into their new home so that at least one problem will be over. Can't do anything about my bitch of an ex-wife, though. Jessica initially isn't keen on the idea, but eventually agrees and starts packing their bags. A few hours later, the couple, along with their 2 daughters, arrive in front of the property that they will now call home. It is revealed that this is the same house where Jessica grew up with her family. She had to leave after an incident with her father, Ben, as a child. He was a good man by all accounts, but one day, out of the blue, he snapped and lost his mind. Ben attacked his daughter, whom he loved more than his life, and even gave little Jessica scars on her arms. He was institutionalized after that event, and Jessica was sent away to live with her grandparents. And now, moving back into this house, her nightmares are sure to stop. Back in the present, we get a peek into the personal dynamics of her own family. Jessica is happily married and is a stepmother to 2 beautiful girls, Taylor and Alice. The younger Alice has taken well to her father's second marriage, but the elder daughter, Taylor, still remains standoffish. This doesn't stop Jessica from trying her best to become a welcoming mother to both of them. She even shows her younger stepdaughter around their new home. That afternoon, Jessica quickly gets back to her work. She is a successful writer and an illustrator. She authored the award-winning children's book series Molly Millipede and Simon the Spider. She is extremely stressed with a deadline for her new book. When Alice enters the room, the kid invites stepmom to take a break from work and play with her. Extremely pleased by this offer, Jessica immediately agrees, suggesting they should play hide and seek. However, as they are playing, Jessica gets a call from her editor and steps out of the house to talk. Alice, on the other hand, keeps searching for her stepmom and eventually ends up in the basement. The little kid looks around the dimly lit space and finds a teddy behind some wooden boxes. It looks like a standard stuffed toy, but it appears as if the teddy bear can psychically communicate with Alice. In fact, it introduces itself as Chauncey, the bear, and says it is feeling hungry. The kid then takes the teddy bear upstairs to her room. Meanwhile, Taylor is busy taking selfies at her room when she sees something really creepy. In the corner of one of her photos, a strange old woman can be seen looking straight into her room. Taylor immediately goes outside to check who the old woman is, but cannot find any trace of her. She is instead greeted by Liam, a young boy from the neighborhood. The 2 teenagers immediately hit it off, and Liam invites her to hang out. Suddenly, Jessica, who is talking to her editor nearby, steps in to have a chat with the youngsters. Taylor, however, is irritated by her stepmom trying to be overly friendly and storms up to her room. The following day, Jessica goes back to her work, feeling reinvigorated with new ideas. Alice soon arrives carrying Chauncey and says the 2 of them are playing scavenger hunt. The first objective of the hunt is finding things that make Alice happy. She requests her stepmom to make something cheerful for her, and the latter obliges. Jessica paints a smiley face on a blue rubber ball and gives it to the delighted kid. Kids are stupid and so easily pleased. However, that night, while preparing to go to bed, Jessica hears a thudding noise from the basement. She goes in to check it out and comes across the same rubber ball that she had earlier given to Alice. She is slightly creeped out as the smiley face is turned into a frown. However, her attention is diverted to a nearby box that has been labeled Jessica 5. It contains a collection of paintings that Jessica did as a 5-year-old kid. She casually skims through them and sees a rather vivid drawing of a door. The whole picture seems trippy, and underneath there is a note that says, "Never, ever." Nonetheless, Jessica leaves the drawing in the basement and heads upstairs to check on Alice. She hears the kid having a tea party with her teddy bear and begins to record it to show it to her husband later on. Jessica thinks the whole scenario is extremely cute until she hears the voice of a woman in the room. She immediately opens the door only for a strange woman to lunge at her. Hearing the commotion, Taylor arrives at the spot and pulls the woman off of Jessica. It is then revealed that the intruder is none other than Max's mentally deranged ex-wife, Samantha. She had broken into the house to meet her kids, but got violent when she noticed Jessica. The police scene arrive and take Samantha back to her mental institution. "You're not allowed to see your kids, you crazy animal." The next afternoon, Max is headed out of town for a show with his band, and his dumbass hat. This guy sucks. His family bids him goodbye and is about to go back inside when an elderly lady approaches Jessica. She introduces herself as Gloria and reveals she used to be Jessica's babysitter when the latter was just a kid. Jessica, on the other hand, barely remembers her time in the house before her mother passed away. A few hours later, Jessica slips out of the house to visit her father, Ben, who is currently admitted in the nursing home. It turns out that he has lost much of his sanity after the incident decades ago. Jessica, however, still visits him, hoping that someday he will get his memories back. She shows him a camcorder that has a video of them playing and several other memories from the good old days. Suddenly, Ben grabs his daughter and begins to hysterically repeat the same phrase, "Get away from CB, Chauncey." There, back at the home, Taylor uses the opportunity to invite Liam over to their house. Alice isn't too fond of the stranger and irritatedly wishes that Chauncey would eat him up. Nonetheless, Liam tries to convince Taylor to raid her father's liquor stash. She forbids him from doing so, but the overly enthusiastic boy picks up a whiskey bottle anyway. Liam is so clumsy that he drops the bottle only seconds later, making a mess on the floor. She orders him to get a towel from upstairs, while she goes to clean the shards of glass. As Liam is searching for some extra towels, he sees something really strange. Someone seems to have put Chauncey under a bed sheet and placed it in the middle of the corridor. Things get even more trippy when the teddy bear begins to slowly drag itself towards Liam. Suddenly, the toy lunges at the teenager, transforming itself into a giant monster in the process. Liam screams in horror, but he's quickly brought back to his senses by Jessica. Turns out she arrived a few minutes ago and confronts her daughter as well as her male friend. An embarrassed Liam goes back to his home without telling anyone about what he saw, or that he dropped the liquor bottle, or that he shit his pants. A few days later, Jessica returns to her home office, but finds that someone has cut the heads off her drawings. Jessica knows that Alice hasn't been getting all the attention she needs, so she concludes that it was the little girl who did this as a means to pour out her pent-up frustration. Jessica then goes into her stepdaughter's room and tries to have a chat with the kid. She opens up about her own difficult upbringing and how she has a strained relationship with her father. Suddenly, she hears Alice playing outside and checks under the bed sheet. An embarrassed Jessica realizes that she's been talking to Chauncey, the teddy bear, all this time. Following this, Jessica casually looks around the room and finds the scavenger hunt list on a nearby desk. The list starts off innocently, but gradually turns more and more sadistic. The final 3 challenges contain sadistic things, like do something that scares you, do something that will get you in trouble, and finally, do something that hurts. Creeped out, Jessica goes to the window to call Alice, only to see a horrifying sight. The kid is outside playing with a piece of wood that seems to be ripped from a nearby fence. Alice is getting ready to impale her palm on a rusty nail that is sticking out of one end of the wood. Jessica realizes that the kid is about to perform the last task on the list. She quickly heads outside and saves her stepdaughter before Alice can hurt herself. A few days later, Jessica calls a child psychologist, Dr. Soto, to come and speak to Alice. The psychologist sets up a camera to record the session and begins to have a conversation with the little kid. She asks Alice about her imaginary friend, and the latter says his name is Chauncey. Dr. Soto urges her to talk to Chauncey about removing the risky things in the scavenger hunt list. Eventually, the kid agrees to do so and starts talking to the teddy bear about what happened a few days ago. The doctor watches on as Alice has a full-on conversation, but thinks that the little kid is talking both for herself as well as for her imaginary friend. However, Chauncey starts to get more aggressive, calling Jessica fake mommy and a bad person. Alice defends her stepmom and eventually says she doesn't want to be friends with him anymore. She leaves the room, sobbing uncontrollably, and runs upstairs to her room. As the session ended abruptly, Jessica asks the doctor about what just happened. Soto tells her that Alice has made an imaginary friend, one who doesn't exist in real life. Now that'll be $300. Jessica interrupts and says that her stepdaughter is actually talking to a real object, her teddy bear, and not a non-existent thing. The doctor, now realizing the root of the problem, says there is no teddy bear. To prove her point, Soto even shows the video recording of the session. To Jessica's utter horror, there is no teddy bear in the video, and Alice is talking to herself. Jessica then calls her elder stepdaughter and asks if she has seen Alice's teddy bear, but Taylor has no idea what she is talking about and confirms that there is in fact no teddy bear. It is now obvious that only Jessica and Alice can see Chauncey. Dr. Soto also shows footage of a similar case where a boy named Louis also had an imaginary friend. It put the boy through the same thing that Chauncey's currently putting Alice through. Right towards the end of the video, Jessica hears Louis say never ever a few times. These are the same words that were written underneath the drawing of a door that Jessica had made when she was 5. Things get even more complicated when moments after the doctor has left, Alice disappears from her room. Taylor, who blames Jessica for this mess, goes outside to look for her sister. She runs into their oddball elder neighbor Gloria, who says she knows where Alice currently is. She invites the teenager into her home and instead begins to explain what happened to Jessica as a child. According to her, Jessica also had an imaginary friend as a child, whose name was also Chauncey. Imaginary friends are spirits who tether to the young and can become sinister if abandoned. Jessica had forsaken Chauncey as a kid.
And now the spirit has turned evil. It wants to take revenge by taking Alice to a different realm, named the Never Ever. Soon afterwards, Gloria and Taylor head back to the latter's house and meet Jessica. Turns out the stepmom has figured out about the Never Ever after going through her old drawings from the basement. Now that they know what's happening, the trio of Jessica, Taylor, and Gloria head to the basement. They too play the scavenger hunt and complete the 3 tasks mentioned in the list. Suddenly, a gleaming door opens in the corner of the basement, and the 3 ladies enter inside. They finally arrive at the place called the Never Ever, a different dimension controlled by the imaginations of the children who inhabit it. As they search for Alice, the entity, which calls itself Chauncey, shows up in his monster bear form and tears Gloria apart. The mother-daughter duo manages to run away from the spot and fortunately stumbles into a room which looks like the family's old apartment in the city. Alice is dressed like a princess, surrounded by presents, and she even has Samantha there. Jessica, realizing that she needs to convince the kid that this never-ever place is not real, hatches up a plan. She begins to smear paint all over the wall, something that Samantha never allowed her kids to do. Alice joins her stepmom in doing so, and a new door opens up. Taylor and Alice get out, while Chauncey chases Jessica in his monster form. Fortunately, Jessica stabs the beast in the eye and makes it through the door to the other end. But she is still in the Never-Ever realm and is slowly cornered by the psychotic clones of her stepdaughters, as well as her father's clone. She is about to be overwhelmed when Taylor pops up on the spot with a baseball bat. She smacks one of the clones on the head and pulls her stepmom away. They finally make it back to the real world. However, their trouble is still not over, as Chauncey also peeks out to the real dimension.
Here's Chauncey!
It tries to drag Jessica back to the Never-Ever, but thankfully, brave little Alice comes up with a permanent solution. She sees kerosene spilt nearby and quickly sets it on fire with the help of a nearby matchbox. Chauncey catches fire, which then spreads throughout the whole basement. Thankfully, Jessica and her stepdaughters make it out just in time, as their whole house is consumed by fire. The next day, Jessica, Taylor, and Alice try to check into a hotel, but they get spooked when they see a teddy bear peeking out from behind a chair. It turns out to belong to a little boy who is telling his mom about his imaginary friend, Rufus. The camera then pans to show that Rufus is exactly similar to Chauncey the bear. I'd say this is is a setup for a sequel, but the chances of that happening are imaginary. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.